The Sustainable Voice, bringing you big successes from small places worldwide.
Welcome back to Sustainable Voice. This is Ashish. How are you? So we have an interesting topic today. Everybody has that friend, right? That friend, the one that you can use as a case study for almost every important topic. Well, I have that friend too. She's actually really cool. She comes from South America, and somewhere along the lines, her bloodline stopped. So she can't actually trace where her family comes from specifically in South America. There, you can go back certain generations, but then it gets lost. And that's what we're going to talk about today. We're going to basically be talking about the fact that there is this erosion of cultural heritage where these indigenous communities are forced to actually move to bigger cities, or they're forced to not just relocate or leave for extended periods of time to bigger cities for their incomes, or for be able to put food on the table, or for gainful employment, that there's nothing actually in their indigenous area. Now, this is not just about tourism. This is just in general. I've seen the effects of this firsthand. There's one particular country. It's a project that our company was working on at some point, that the some of the people would leave. The elders would leave, go to bigger cities to go find work, be gone for 2 months, 3 months, 4 months. And then multinational corporations would show up and actually talk to the remaining family members, most of whom were illiterate. They would give them paperwork that they were signing, thinking that it was government assistance or it was something. Turns out they were signing away the deed to their land. This is the part that's really important. The fact that we need to start talking about community-based employment. We need to start talking about how to reverse this erosion of cultural heritage, this erosion where indigenous communities on their native lands think that in order to be able to put food on the table, they have to leave for bigger metropolises. One of the algorithms that my company has worked on is a jobs tracker, basically. We're able to take one event and track how many jobs that event creates. In this case, it's a client or a visitor to a particular country, how many jobs that one visitor creates. And there's a key indicator, a KPI there, which is for community-based employment. And the average across about 40 destinations is 10%, 1 in 10 jobs. Now, in certain countries in Africa, that number is up to 30%. Should be higher. If we're able to make little changes and bring these people, these indigenous communities, their elders to the table for tourism, for example, the conversation shifts because there's a voice that's missing completely that needs to be there. And that's a big part of this, right? It's understanding the fact that bloodlines in the context of heritage, identity, it's migration versus preservation, right? The two go hand in hand. Are you migrating to preserve? And what if you don't have to? What if preservation means actually bringing the ability to preserve your heritage to you so you don't have to migrate? And we're not talking about cross-border. We're talking within a particular country, leaving ancestral land and going to bigger cities. So when I talked to this friend, and I've talked to her for years about this, and there's more like her. There's friends of mine who are guides. I've talked to them about it. And one in particular, he's always talking to me about the fact that he can trace his family back 2 generations, but then at that point, something has shifted. There was a change, and he can't tell what it is. Any of you do one of those DNA tests, right? Doesn't matter where you come from. And you start seeing your background. You start seeing, whether it's a DNA test, where your heritage is. Although everybody is perceived to be an offshoot of Genghis Khan, when we start looking at your heritage, some of you will see your heritage is mixed. Some of you an Eastern European, some of you Western European, some of you are different. Some of you part Asian. Some of there's different elements. So what you want to ask yourself, well, it's great that you have so many elements that make up your DNA, such a rich background. That's fantastic. What I tell people is you need to be able to ask the question of, how do I trace all of it? At what point did I go from being this to 20% this, 20% that, 30% that, 10% that? There's nothing wrong with it. It's just understanding. See, when we look at our DNA tests and we start tracking the heritage, the lineage, you can see, okay, oh, wow, it's great. There's diversity. Fantastic. It's a different story when you're talking about people and elders and communities in remote parts of the world. Their background isn't as diverse. It is traced back to that land, grandparents, great-grandparents, great, 5, 6 generations. But what's happening more and more is past 3 generations doesn't divert like the way yours would to 20% this, 30% that. It just stops. And it stops because somewhere along, and it's not two communities coming together or two elders forming a new community or merging of cultures. It just stops. That's what I'm talking about when I talk about the erosion of community. So why are indigenous communities moving to cities? What's the cultural cost versus the economic necessity? So let's address the problem first. And I've seen this firsthand in many different places. I've seen this firsthand. It just was at a leadership conference where the topic of indigenous employment came up. Community-based employment came up as basically saying that this is bringing them to the table for tourism in particular is so important. It's crucial. It moves the needle. It gives a voice to the people who should have the loudest voice. And it's not just in the poorest countries in the world. It's right here at home too. Anywhere you go, you take a look at the fact that the native communities, the ones whose ancestral land this really is, they're under assault. In one particular country in South America, they're labeled as terrorists. And that isn't the only country, even though they're not. There is a widening gap. So we have to think about this, that, why are they moving to cities? Are they assimilating to modern life and getting employment in modern life, whereas what they should be doing is preserving their heritage and us assimilating to them? I'll never forget this gentleman that I met back in 2009. I met him through a very good friend of mine, Camilo. Some of you know Camilo if you're in the travel industry. He's Colombian. He works for a well-known cruise line. He's one of the smartest people I know. He introduced me to this tribal elder, Danilo, from the northern parts of Colombia, near the Tayrona region. When I met Danilo, he was talking about these caña flechas, they call them, these bracelets they make out of heart of palm. They basically take apart the palm, then they braid it and they make a bracelet out of it. It's quite beautiful. And they make these, and they're called caña flechas. And every time they learn something, they put a new one on. So he had them all the way up his arm. And everything he went through in life was about learning something new. And every time Mother Earth taught him something new, he put on a new caña flecha. It was halfway up his arm. Was one of the most dynamic people I've ever met. We communicated through his dialect, through a translator. It was profound. And what he was talking about was the idea of learning was paramount in his culture. Now imagine if he had to move to Bogota to work or to Cartagena to work, where there is no way to preserve that culture. That lesson, which society seems to have forgotten when you just open the newspaper and realize that not just now, but for the last 100 years or last 50 years or 20 years, the whole world seems to have just forgotten this idea that we're here to keep learning. We're not here to rule. We're here to learn. And when you see his lesson, imagine if that was taken to a big city and that lesson was forgotten, what would happen? He believed one of his lessons was that we have to do for others at all times. We have to be in service of others at all times. Now, I thought those were just words with Danilo. But if I take you back a few years, I came to find out that he actually jumped into the water near where his community was to save somebody who was drowning and to rescue them, to do unto others. Here's the problem. He couldn't swim, which means he drowned. And so he drowned while that person survived. And yes, that's the part that we all see. But what I see is the fact that he actually stayed true to the lesson he learned that we have to do unto others at all times. And you hear it from religious pundits, talking heads, I'm sure, in different religions, different gospels, of course. And it seems common sense. But if it's actually something that's in your DNA from your ancestors, if it's in your DNA, it's a different story. Take another example. I have several friends who are Maasai, who are our guides in different parts of Kenya. And we've recorded a podcast with both of them in the last few months. And it was basically about the cultural preservation. And some of you met Bonnie and Solomon. So Solomon and I had a really deep conversation about what his community believes when it comes to death, that they don't believe in it, that people live everlasting. His father lives everlasting. And we were walking at full speed and really just engaged in the whole way. And that was something that was just a profound conversation. We had this conversation, a year, almost 2 years after my father had passed away, and his father had passed. But we didn't look at it as they had passed. We looked at it as the fact that they were still around. And that lesson came in handy because I was helping somebody through grief when her mother passed away. And I explained to her what Solomon taught me. Well, now you don't have to share. Now you can speak to that person whenever you want through in whatever way works for you. And you might actually hear something back. And now you're not having to share the attention with anybody. Now you get to have quality time. Now you get to have this. But I learned that from Solomon. Those kinds of learnings happen all over the place. But when we ask Indigenous people, communities, and elders to move to big cities, there's a cultural cost. Economic necessity is always there, but there's a cultural cost. Economic necessity we can fix. Cultural cost nobody can pay. Economic necessity we can actually change the formula to be inclusive of these communities. We should be inclusive of these communities, something that I have lobbied for decades, where community-based tourism and community-based employment in tourism should be at least 20% worldwide. You know, and in other countries, other parts of the world, even upwards of 50%. And it's not complicated to do. It's just a matter of making changes and being willing to make and commit to those changes. Is it more complicated to make these changes? No. Is it more complicated to maintain these changes? Absolutely. Absolutely. I've sat in on negotiations between a camp owner and a conservancy, the local community and the conservancy, and they are cantankerous is an understatement. It gets pretty messy, but they part as friends and realize that what they have is more powerful than their disagreements. They work through their disagreements. They find compromise. They find ways to make this work, and it's really quite. And I've sat in on this, and it's just a sight to see when you understand how they are communicating and what's on the table. And it does get personal at times. So is maintaining the cultural heritage a challenge? Every day. Is it the harder, more inclined path that's rocky and a bit uneven? Absolutely. Does it require careful thoughtfulness? Does it require foresight? Does it require a vision? Does it require a gentle touch? Does it require grit? Does it require endless amounts of commitment? Absolutely. But what do you get in return? You get to protect the bloodline and a lesson like what Danilo and Solomon taught me that gets permeated through society, and it permeates up through society, permeates down through society, so that what you see in the news today maybe doesn't happen as often. Maybe some of the decisions we make are focused more on learning and less on protecting. They're focused more on being able to understand more versus trying to beat your chest and say you're the best. So that's a big part of this. The other thing that's very important is what gets lost when traditions are no longer produced daily. When they're practiced and produced, what gets lost? It's not just the culture. I talked about the caña flechas that Danilo made, or Solomon and his community talking about how they don't believe in death, how they believe in everlife. Could you imagine using teachings like that to make grief just a little bit easier for a child who's lost a parent prematurely? Or using the lessons of Danilo just to make life a little bit easier to say, if you're studying a topic that you don't like as a student, that put this on when you learn something new. Figure out how to take what you've learned in organic chemistry and apply it to life. What you've learned in, yes, even trigonometry and calculus, and how you apply it to life. I say that as a side topic because the side calculus, I threw it in there on purpose, because I remember being in vector calculus and people telling me, oh, you're never going to use this now. And yet here I am, and half the world is being coded using a calculus-based algorithm. So I kind of just stop and say, you never know when this is going to come in. So what you're losing is lessons for life, lessons that can make our lives better. You never know when you're going to need them. If any of you have played Zelda or any of these role-playing games, I played this as a kid, I'm aging myself, but you can never have a belt big enough. You can never have enough tools in your belt, or you'll pick up a particular tool or a particular clue or a particular key. It's not for use right now. It's for use 3 levels from now, 4 levels from now. Oh, I'm going to need this when I face this. I'm going to need this here. It's the same thing. We're playing chess. Life is a game of chess. We are playing chess, all of us. And if you're picking up something for that journey, it may not be for use right now. I learned vector calculus 20 years ago. I never thought I'd see it again, and here we are. It's coming into play. When we talked about aerospace engineering, we talked about aeronautical engineering, we talked about planetary movements. Oh, I'm never going to see this in society. Yet here we are. And I'll never forget. I shared this conversation just as a sidebar. I shared this conversation with one of my son's teachers some years ago, and we were talking. My son's an aerospace engineer major, and we talked about this with professor, and we were talking about space. And I said, I was telling him, I said, I did vector calculus because I dreamt of space. I dreamt of the stars. I was using it to track planetary movements because I was really enjoying it. I just was into it. I loved everything about it. I'm a kid from Africa. We looked up the stars, but didn't know what it meant. And I was enjoying every bit of it. And he says, well, your child and everybody else's child, that's his age, has the ability not just to work, but live in space or be part of space. And I know it sounds crazy when I say this, but just think about it for a second. Maybe it's not as crazy. At the time of this writing, at the time of this recording, SpaceX is about to go public on the stock market. Now, I digressed completely, but just think about the fact that something I learned 20 years ago is now helping to power a company going public on the US stock market that is going to be the most valuable publicly traded company, or the most valuable public offering in history. Or the fact that the next two most valuable public listings in the history of the US stock market are both powered by calculus-based algorithms, something I learned 20 years ago. So when we talk about the cost of this leaving and the cost of the traditions being lost and not in what gets lost, it's the lessons we learned 20 years that we might need 20 years from now. So it's Zelda. We're playing Zelda, and it's our belt and our tool belt, and we have all these necessary keys and tools that we're going to need to fight off evil forces later on, or whatever it is. And we don't know where we're going to need it, but we as a society have forgotten how to even pick these things up, whereas these cultures are reminding us that the traditions that have been handed down by generations for centuries still apply today, that these are tools that we are going to apply no matter where you are in the social class of life. Doesn't matter whether you drive a Bentley or a bicycle, that these apply to you, right? And that's the thing. So let's talk about jobs and cultural preservation, because I said earlier that the assimilation shouldn't be from them to us. It's the other way around. We can change the economic algorithm. We can change the model to be able to include them. So I've had a long belief, I mentioned to you, that tourism is a powerful driver. Obviously, it is the world I come from, but it's sustainable tourism is a powerful driver. But within that, though, there's something really important, which is the fact that when you look at the jobs that come from communities, the most successful countries that actually have a good balance with tourism, those countries have two things in common. One, the tourism mechanism, again, tourism done the right way. I'm not talking about overcrowding. Tourism done the right way makes up at least 10% of their gross domestic product. The second is that at least 20% of the employment comes from communities. Now, think about this. The World Travel Tourism Council, of which I'm a regional member, says that 1 in 10 jobs worldwide are tourism-based. And it's going to be shifting to 1 in 8, 1 in 6, but on average, 1 in 10. So 10% of the global workforce is tourism-derived, directly or indirectly. And of that 10%, on average, across 40 destinations I checked, about 10% of the employment is community-based. So out of 35 jobs on average, or 30 jobs on average that one visitor creates for a particular country, 3 come from a community. Now, this algorithm was perfected in Peru. We actually took a year to put it together. And as we were putting it together, we started noticing that if we just make subtle changes, instead of actually focusing the tourism mechanism just on one part of the country, that if we head north, if we head to places like Huaraz, to Chachapoyas, to Illescas, or whatever the case, right? All of a sudden, that number, that ratio jumps. All of a sudden, instead of it being 11% when it's in Cusco and Machu Picchu, it's up near 50%. Up in those areas because of the communities you're talking to. That's the powerful part. That's what I'm talking about. The fact that we can change the tourism model. There's a direct link. If we can make community-based employment 20% of the employment that makes up 10% of the world's labor, that's huge. Now, we have an opportunity because over the next 10 years, there are 43 million jobs in tourism that are going to go unfilled. They don't need to be filled by warm bodies. They need to be filled by people in communities. Now, I know what some of you are saying right now. Yeah, but you know what? AI is going to come in and take these jobs. Look, that's a separate conversation. That is a separate part. But you ask anybody, Jeff Bezos, ask anybody, they will tell you, and they've been on record as saying this. The people who are creating these platforms have been on record as saying that the jobs that are going to be there are the ones that a computer can't do. So that means empathy, that means emotion, manual skill, manual labor, you name it. But that part is there. What does community based employment look like? That's manual work, that's empathy, that's education, that's emotion, everything I described to you. That's not my list. That's the same list that Jeff Bezos put out. That's the same list that Anthropic put out, same list that every other major CEO of AI generating companies talked about. We can put the Elon Musk to one side, and what he said is fair points on that side too. But I'm just simply saying to you that none of us actually know. Yeah, we know where it's heading, but none of us can actually say for sure it's going to be this when it comes to AI. But we can for sure say, because it's a proven model, that if at least 2 out of 10 jobs in a particular country that's based in tourism come from in a community, there is a shift. There is a shift because it's a preservation of culture and heritage within those regions. The one thing that we have to be very careful of is that we cannot erode all these different cultures. If we all assimilate to one culture, then what do we have left? If we all assimilate to believing the exact same thing, we have no discussion, no dissent, no debate. Everybody just says, yes, I agree. Yes, I agree. Yes, I agree. You know what happens when that starts occurring? Tunnel vision. And in tunnel vision, really bad decisions get made over and over and over again. Sound familiar? How many of you are happy with how the world's heading in your particular part of the world? I guarantee you less than 40%, unless you live in a country that measures growth by gross national happiness. Other than that, which one country does. But outside of that, do you really want that everybody assimilates to the exact same thing and just believes in the same thing, and then we're all basically all robots, no pun intended, all just focus on the same thing? Or do we want to take the lessons handed down by generations, lessons that still apply thousands of years ago, and they apply 500 years from now, 1,000 years from now, lessons that we need to get, lessons that drove Danilo, my friend from Tyrone area, to jump into the water when he couldn't swim to save the life of somebody? There's no mainframe that can do that. There is no robot that can do that, not without calculating losses first. He couldn't swim, but he jumped in to save a person's life and gave his own. That's something. That's something. That's what we want to talk about, right? There's a different insight here. So that's the insights from the job report, the algorithm that my company put together, right? The fact that we saw that in 40 destinations we looked at, on average, 30 to 35 jobs were created. We broke it down by transport, by hotels, by restaurants, by land services. On average, 30 to 35 jobs. And what was amazing is when we went through the algorithm, we took a sample size and there were exact same metrics, exact same parameters, and took the sample size from each country and plugged it into an algorithm. And as we did this, what was really incredible is the fact that every single place we went to, they all said the same thing. I had no idea. I had no idea this was that it was that many. In one country, in Tanzania, it was 72 jobs for one booking. 72, when the average is 30 to 35 in other parts of the world. That's huge. And I'll use Egypt as an example. When we did the algorithm, we first did the algorithm, we saw the community-based jobs in Egypt was 0. But then we stepped back and said, wait a second, if we make this change and this change and this change, we can bring that up to over 10%. We can make it 15%, but we got to be deliberate about making these changes. We did. So in one change, we started including where basically 1.5 to 2 jobs out of every 10 in Egypt are now community-based jobs, because we saw the data and said, we can make this change. When we look at a place like Kenya, it's 30%. Tanzania, same thing, over 30%. Colombia was up near 40%. Peru was 11%, but if you go up north, it's up near 50%. They're deliberate changes. So what we noticed right away is that the lever for the community-based employment is a lever that we can actually pull. It is a change that we can make. Of course, with permission, we have to talk to the community elders, and we have to make sure that there is a mutual benefit to them joining the tourism mechanism. But the fact that we see the data and we can say, we want to take the lessons that were handed down through your generations, and we want to bring that to the table. Make sure it has a voice at the table, because by God, we need these lessons. These are some important lessons. Just take a step back. 2 separate lessons right now I described to you. One that talks about being so willing to be selfless to others that you're willing to jump into the ocean when you yourself cannot swim simply because you saw somebody drowning. And the second is that the belief in grief and moving through grief is not to stop and that your life is over, but to literally say, there is no such thing as death. There is only an afterlife. There is a life that continues because of a belief, right? And you get to choose what you want to learn, not learn, but at least you have the option to learn. You know why I say this? All the conversations you hear about AI and people should be plumbers and should be technicians and technicals, awesome. I think that's fantastic. The world already doesn't have enough mechanics and plumbers. We need more skilled labor like that. Absolutely. But you know what I didn't hear get mentioned there and the world definitely needs more of? Teachers. Here's what you don't hear in the conversation. The fact that the one part of society that, among many is, but this part that I believe we have undervalued for far too long is teachers. And this model of community-based employment and the model of preserving cultural heritage is one of the paramount lessons that we learned in school. Whether you're in a kindergarten, whether you're in an AP class, whether you're in college, teachers, they are the backbone of our society. Along with farmers, along with tradesmen, they are right there. And what this is about is education. And for far too long, we have commoditized it. This model of preserving culture is about bringing teachers to the forefront, because whether you're a teacher in a school or an elder in a community, you are still a teacher, and we have a lot to learn. I used to race cars, as some of you know, and one of my favorite driver growing up was Ayrton Senna from Brazil. He tragically lost his life in 1994 in an accident in Imola. But I loved how he raced. I was obviously nowhere near as talented as, but I used to race small blocks, and I would watch his movements. I would watch everything, and he would talk about the fact that you're always learning. One of his last interviews he gave before he passed away in the accident in Italy, he basically talked about the fact, he said, "You're always learning." Because if you're not learning, you're not living. He goes, and I'm paraphrasing, of course. But he talked about the fact that life is about always learning. He was 34 at the time, and he said, if I'm not learning, then what am I doing? How true is that? And what he said, what a famous race car driver from Brazil said to me, and said to a camera, what a community elder from Colombia, what a Maasai elder from Kenya both told me, that I'm always talking to my father because he's always teaching me lessons. Do you know that Maasai elder, the way he approached grief, the way he approached evergreen is exactly how I approach my father's death. The fact that I don't get to share him. And that one lesson helped me help this friend who lost her mother to say, now you get to talk to her without sharing her. Now you get to have conversations with her. Now you get to actually hear answers back. And now you get to see where you can talk to her. We've gotten so good at just saying that our way is the best. And we've gotten so good at just believing that there's nothing left to learn. Are you kidding me? I remember when I was taking back to calculus, and I had how many people coming to me and saying, God, when are you going to use that? Here we are 20 years later, and it looks like it's coming in pretty handy. Think about that. This is about teaching. It's about teachers and how we value teachers, not just teachers in schools, teachers in universities, teachers in public and private settings, but teachers in communities, our elders, tribal elders, our own paternal elders, our own maternal elders, our own family elders. They're teachers. They're teaching us things handed down by generation. You guys don't believe me? Those of you who don't believe me, then pick whatever religion you are. Do you read from a certain scripture, whether it's a Bible or a Bhagavad Gita or whatever the case? Do you read from a scripture? Was that scripture written yesterday, or was it handed down by generation? Was it passed down and taught to you that this is what our belief system is? Do you drive a car? Is an electric car that was designed by somebody who built it how many centuries ago? Do you drive a gasoline car that was, with the assembly line was created by somebody who built it over a century ago? Nothing you do is something that just happened yesterday. It's all based on stuff that was learned. The person who made your smartphone, who designed your smartphone, that person learned a lesson from a teacher somewhere along the way. So we need to make sure we have that part of the conversation as well. When we talk about communities and preservation of culture and preservation of a way of life, we are talking about education, something that we have forgotten far too much about. We get so caught up in how we rank versus X country and Y country. But what about what we're actually learning at the rate at which we are learning? Has nothing to do with reading scores and writing scores. It has everything to do with opening your mind and listening. When you think about this, just the idea that we can actually move the needle to bring communities to the mechanism and say, look, we can change this model to be inclusive of you, right? But what's happened is, right, the word inclusive has become an evil word, right? No, I don't believe in DEI. I don't. Okay, look, that's a separate political discussion. That's not what I'm talking about. But diversity, equity, and inclusion doesn't come from when it's politicized. It comes from what we were taught by our elders, right? What we were taught from whatever book you're reading from, all religions, whatever you're reading from. It comes from these tribal elders that taught me. That's really important. I'll tell you. So Danilo's lesson from his community, If not for that lesson permeating through, I'll prove it to you right now, I'm actually not here. And I'll explain to you what I mean. 2012, I was in Namibia. I had a mishap with an ATV, and I was probably 3 hours from civilization. There was a gentleman who is still in my life. He was the head of a nonprofit in Namibia. If not for him showing up with his truck to ask if I need a ride home, I'm in a Namibian desert. I'm 3 hours from civilization. Where do you think I end up? I'm not here. But because the lessons that Danilo is teaching us about giving unto others, thank goodness somebody taught him that lesson, because he was there to actually help me. Just think about that for a second. You know why it's needed? Because the same breath, there was a person when I when I was a child who put a knife to my throat, didn't like the color of my skin. I was 14. And what did he say afterwards? I was just kidding. And he said that because his parents basically beat him for getting, and not because of what he did, but because he got suspended from school. Right? Where do we stop learning about education? Where do we stop learning? And I know what I just said. Where do we stop learning about education? When did we stop educating? When did we stop believing that life is about learning? So teachers, that's the central part of what gets lost and why this is so important to preserve the cultural aspect of things. This is absolutely important. And the localized impact gets real, but it's not just localized. That localized impact, when you're preserving a way of life, then that permeates out. Instead of our way of life permeating into their way of life, well, and you see it everywhere. Oh, no, this place has gotten so touristy now, it's overcrowded, there's garbage everywhere, there's this. What if their way of life permeated out to us, where we got a chance to just slow down and say, okay, let's ask more questions. We're going to build this, fantastic, let's ask more questions. We're working on a rocket that's trying to go to Mars right now. We're working on a whole bunch of systems, algorithms, and data centers that are designed to make life easier and automate parts of our life in ways that we never thought imaginable. We have cyborgs, robots dancing on stage, which how many years ago was it just an arm or a robot that barely moved? And now they're actually human movements. The progress we are making as society is profound, and it is moving faster and faster and faster. I'm not talking about slowing it down. I'm simply saying that the education that we get from elders and communities in different parts of the world should play a large role in how we move forward. Because if we don't, then those lessons we're ignoring right now are going to come back to haunt us in the future. And we're going to come back and say, oh, we should have listened. We should have listened. There's value in that. Tremendous amount of value. Now, there's also this notion that tourism is a cultural lifeline. It supports identity from community-based, community elders and community way of life, and it does. But I want to remove one aspect of this, right? I'm not saying that if we actually bring communities to the table for tourism, that we're going to help them in poverty. How many of them actually, think about it. How many of you look at a community in Kenya, for example, a Samburu tribe, and go, oh, they're so poor. They don't have anything. Whereas I've visited them, sat with them in their homes, and they're wealthier than we are. And it has nothing to do with money. I never forget a conversation I had in February this year. I was actually with Solomon, and we were actually visiting a Maasai community. And it wasn't one of these touristy communities, one that we were coming in because we were starting to have conversations about getting involved in a social project there. And I had a gentleman from Canada with me, and the lady of the house asked where we're from. And we said, I'm from the US, he's from Canada. And so then she proceeded, tell me about your house, as we're sitting in hers. He proceeds to tell her that he has a basement. All of a sudden, she stops. And when we tell him it's a room underground, it's a whole part of the house is underground, her eyes just lit up, completely lit up at that point. Everybody, she called in everybody in the community, come in, you have to hear this. This man lives underground. This man lives underground. She was so curious that at that point, she wanted to understand how he would do that. Why? I found out afterwards, because she wanted to use what we were telling her to see if there were ways she could help the elders in her community to build deeper irrigation ditches, to be able to hold water longer during drought, to be able to have a water table, to be able to have a conversation about a basement, and we were sitting on a dirt floor. That's what I'm talking about. That's the thing. This cannot be, let's bring them into the equation as tourism, as community-based elders because they're so poor. No. We're bringing them in because they actually have something to teach us, not because they're a welfare case. And there's a big difference between the two. Now, are there some impoverished communities? Absolutely. The question shouldn't be, how do we help them? The question is, how did we make them impoverished in the first place? right? There are communities, for example, in the Amazon jungle that have everything, and then somehow they get, if the right word is, convinced to sell their land because they're promised X, Y, and Z. And when they get given all these modern gifts, they end up actually living in poverty. They get big screen TVs, but not given electricity. They get built houses, but not given electricity or heating or cooling or running water. What happened? Whereas it should have been about actually protecting their way of life. It's about actually understanding that there is wealth already there. And just because they don't carry a wallet like we do or use money printed on paper like we do, and that they barter in a different system of livestock and other elements, or because they have, they would measure wealth by how many wives they have, for example. There's a difference. There's a big difference, and we want to basically make sure that we talk about this. It's where it's where you have community-led tourism equations and the risk that comes with the fact that we commercialize these things. I'll give you a prime example. If we go to the northern parts of Peru, if we go to Juarez, there's a community here that I visited with my friend Diego and a bunch of other friends as well. And we were, and actually working with them as well. I'm not talking about volunteering, but I wanted to learn for myself and go through. But then it was about potatoes, how they make potatoes, what type of potatoes, how the different species of potatoes, how they actually preserve the potatoes. And do you know that lesson has come in so handy because there are now researchers that actually are using all the different species of potatoes in Peru to be able to start tracking as a method or as a means of just how far the Incan Empire reached during the height of its rule when it was in Peru, how far it reached. Potatoes. And in this community, we're sitting there understanding all the different types of potatoes, how they grow them, what they're based of, where the starch levels are, what. All of a sudden, here we are, right? We're understanding this. This comes from a community that doesn't read English, speak English, write English. They barely speak Spanish. They speak in native tongue. And you start hearing their dialect, but they have the most beautiful rituals. And you know what happened during that time? One of the gentlemen with me, he was celebrating his wedding anniversary and his wife was not there. So we actually had the anniversary celebrated. It was just impromptu. And we celebrated the anniversary with the people there. What they did for this man put him in tears. Absolutely just thrown into full emotion because he was overcome with a sincere, profound energy. It wasn't intended. It wasn't planned. It just happened. And what he said afterwards is that that feeling was so pure that it reminded him why he married his wife in the first place. She wasn't even there. That's huge. That's absolutely massive. And I ran into both of them actually recently at a different conference. And both came up and said, "Oh my gosh, that experience." His wife came and said, "I heard all about it, and it was incredible. I've told all my friends about it." And you know why that's important is because you never know who you're talking to, right? You might be talking to a newlywed or somebody who's about to get married, and now all of a sudden the lesson comes in, and what happened, what this community did for you and your husband of 60 years, for example. Now it starts blending to a lesson you're able to teach somebody who's about to get married. Think about that. Now, there's a risk of commercialization, when we don't actually focus on preservation. Again, when we ask these communities to assimilate to us, then, oh yeah, here, build this and we'll come and visit you. Build this, build a visitor center and we'll come and visit you. All of a sudden, different things show up. All of a sudden, inequality shows up. Wage gaps show up. Everything shows up. But if you do it the right way, if you do it the absolute right, then all of a sudden it's a different element. Then it's a matter of actually coming in and basically saying, okay, what if we assimilate to you? Show us how you farm your potatoes. We'll try to use that here. Show us the lessons that you have, what these kind of lessons teach you. That's great. We want to put this through to our school. Think about this for a second, okay? The country of Bhutan measures their economic success by something called gross national happiness, something that's been handed down by generations. The royal family believes that. I've talked to members of the royal family about this, and it is something they measure. It's called gross national happiness. It's something that they believe is how they measure how far along their community is growing. Do you know outside of Bhutan what the greatest collection of happiness has been and how it was measured and what it was? The Taylor Swift Eras Tour. Something handed down, and whether you like her, don't like her, there are proven models that say that her concerts have been the greatest collection of happiness in modern history. And that same measurement of happiness, where did it come from? A measurement of gross national happiness in Bhutan that has been there for generations, for centuries. And that was just put into modern pop culture. What more proof do you need than that? You now have every concert promoter and every musical artist now has a benchmark for the concert that they have to top, not because of how much it grossed, because they'll always gross more, but because of how it made you feel, because it was the largest collection of happiness, a model that was taught from the model of gross national happiness in Bhutan. Indirectly, of course, because nobody's going to quote it. But if you sit back and look at it, there it is. So where's the line between sharing and exploiting, right? What's the line between sharing and exploiting? Sharing means taking their lesson, I believe, taking their lessons and applying it to your daily life, taking it in earnest and applying it to your daily life. I remember this conversation I had with a shaman. My wife and my family and I had met this shaman in Guatemala. We were walking through and we were like just having conversations. Then we left. Something told me to turn around. I don't know what it was. And so I turned around and the shaman says, "I'm really happy you turned around. The fire was following you on the way out." Now you take that for whatever it's worth, but the fire was following you on the way out. Do you know what I use it for now? Whenever I see a flame somewhere, I will always watch how the flame is moving, which direction. And I'm not looking to see which direction, but because I remember that shaman, okay, the fire is following me. But then I'm also seeing, is there oxygen coming in from this area, that area? If I'm ever in a situation where I have to help put out a fire, or if there is a fire, and I have set my apartment on fire. But if that happened, knowing what I've learned now from him, the first thing I'm doing is seeing which way the flame's going. It's a lesson that I would apply in the most desperate of situations when there's a fire and it's life and death. A lesson a shaman told me that was handed down by generations. That's the sharing. Now, exploitation is, hey, come here and play the didgeridoo here. Come here and show me how to throw a boomerang. Come here and jump up and down and dance for me. Come here and show me how you chant. Come here and do this. Come here and sell this. Come here and do this. Come here and not. It's not come here. It's I go there. I want to go there. I want to go learn. That's the whole point. So what responsibility do we have as travelers? Let's think about this, right? As just global citizens, what responsibility do we have? Keep learning. Go there with the intent to learn. Go there understanding that everybody you meet in life is a teacher. Whether you're a professor in school, whether you're a director of your marching band, they're a teacher. Whether it's an elder, they're a teacher. Whether it's your parents, they're a teacher. Whether it's your religious leader, they're a teacher. As long as they're pure. But that's the whole point. Go in there with this notion. The responsibility is don't go there looking down like, oh my gosh, I have to help these people. How do you know that they are not wealthy in their own right? Just because they don't measure wealth by what you measure wealth, but doesn't mean that they're poor. Go in there with an open mind, no preconceived notions. And when you go and see them, it's not what you can teach them. It's you listening for what they can teach you. That's huge. So we have to reframe this, that it's a tool for cultural continuity. And that's what we're looking at. As a responsibility for travelers, we have to believe that we are the vessel for cultural continuity, right? We're all doing these, or a lot of us do these DNA tests to see where we came from. Why do we want to find out where we came from? Oh, I'm part East European. I'm part German. I'm part French. I'm part African. I'm part this. I'm part that. Okay, I'm part Kenyan. I'm part of me from Senegal. Why do we do this? Why do we trace our roots? Oh, my family's from here. My roots are from here, because we want to identify. We want to identify. We want to be able to associate and say, yes, this is my background. This is where I'm from, right? This is what I believe. This is where my belief system comes from. So we have to understand that we, as global citizens, as travelers, we are the vessel for cultural continuity. And these indigenous people, these tribal elders, these community elders that are here, these native communities that are in these different places, they are the culture that we need to actually make part of our equation. They have so much to teach us. We're the vessel to bring them forward. They're the actual lesson. They're the wisdom. So preserving culture, and I'll close with this. It does require economic viability. And that means that jobs algorithm, where we actually have a mechanism that shows, okay, the goal for us is that at least 2 out of 10 jobs should come from a community to start with. It should be 3, then 4, then 5, but it should be there. If tourism as a whole done right represents 10% of the global workforce, and that means as 10% of the global workforce, we actually are a vessel, a mechanism to make this change. So that means that we have to understand that we control the economic equation to be able to preserve culture, to bring them to the table. not to create a smaller table for them to sit at so we can look down on, but to bring them to our table. And then we sit in smaller chairs and look up at them and say, please teach us. Please teach us what you have done. So my closing thought to you is, as you are teaching yourself, please remember that generational wealth and generational knowledge are the exact same thing. Generational wealth doesn't mean money printed on paper. Generational knowledge doesn't lead to money printed on paper, but they are the same thing. The richest people in the world are the smartest people in the world. And they're not smart because they memorized every single periodic table or algorithm. They're the smartest people in the world because they understand how life works and they have lessons passed down for generations that could really come in handy for us. So my call to action to all of you is that as you are out educating yourself, if you're traveling, if you're just out in society, if you meet somebody who is from an Indigenous community or meet somebody who has lived life, please stop and listen and ask them to teach you. And if you are, I know some of you at the time of this recording are going to be going into summer break. If you're listening to this, your parents are listening to this on your last day and you're going into school, go to your teacher and just say thank you. Just make sure you say those words, thank you, because there is no better wealth than wisdom. That is the most powerful one. Till next time, take care.
Thank you for listening to The Sustainable Voice. If you have a success story of your own, please reach out and share it with us. Would love to hear from you. See you next time.